Hi beautiful, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to finish my ranking of every single palette I tried in 2022. It turns out I ended up trying 69 palettes total, and in yesterday's video, I ranked my palettes from number 69 to number 16. I left 15 palettes for today's video because these are my top 15 palettes I have tried this year. Period. My favorite color stories, my favorite formulas, the palettes that I'm the most excited about. And so in today's video, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth, maybe show you some finger swatches of my favorite shades that are in these palettes, show you maybe what videos I've created with them in case you're interested in the palette or you want to go back and watch any of those videos, etc. I'm super pumped. If you are excited for today's video, don't forget to please give it a thumbs up and let's just go ahead and get started. Alright, top 15 palettes of 2022, and at number 15 I have a palette that I don't even know if you guys remember a lot because I briefly talked about it in a video and a lot of palettes came out right after it, and even though I loved it, I never went back to talk about it some more. I did put it in my favorites video, but I didn't create any more looks with it or anything like that, and it is such a stunning palette. I definitely have to create a little bit more content with this one, I feel like, because I am in love. It has a beautiful formulas, it has creamy blendable pigmented mattes, stunning very highly pigmented intense shimmers, which is exactly what I love, and also a fantastic and very wearable, in my opinion, color story. This palette is from an indie brand. I believe it is made in Australia, and it is the Glaminatrix palette in Nearly Natural right here. Take a look at this mauvey dream. Here's what the inside of the palette looks like. In my opinion, pure perfection. It has a couple of perfect transition shades, one a bit more cool toned than the other. It has these really stunning green shades right here in the middle. I'm obsessed with both the matte and the shimmer in the green color are beautiful. This mid-tone mauve right here is perfect to intensify any look. And then you have a very deep brown and a more burgundy looking deeper type of color to intensify everything with. Oh, there's also a warmer transition shade right here. Just pure perfection, because then you have these really awesome, very highly pigmented shimmers that make your eyes pop like crazy. Okay, so let's do some finger swatches of my favorite shimmer colors right here. I just love the color story of this palette with a passion. I think it is amazing. Just take a look right there at how astonishingly beautiful these shades are. Very amazing metallic colors. I'm obsessed, obviously. Let me swatch some more. I'm going to swatch the matte deep burgundy shade. I'm going to swatch the mauvey mid-tone shade. I'm not going to swatch the transition shades because they're just great, but you know, they're a little bit more average. Oh my god, I have to swatch the olive shade. And let me swatch one more shimmer as well right here. Okay, take a look right here. Look at how creamy these matte shades look. Look at the intensity of those shimmers. And next, take a look at all of my favorite shades together right here. I'm incredibly obsessed with how amazing this palette is. I highly recommend it if it's still available on their website. Hopefully it is. I know that it takes a few weeks for them to be able to actually get the product to you, but I promise you, the wait is 100% worth it. I love this palette. I'm going to leave you a link to the video that I made using this palette, because I know that it was like a general review of new products. It wasn't a dedicated video, but I'm obsessed with this color story and the formulas. Just everything about it is a 10 out of 10. I highly recommend it. Obviously, these are my top 15 palettes of the year, so I highly recommend each and every single one of them. The next one I'm going to talk about at number 14 is this one right here, the Patrick Ta Major Dimension eyeshadow palette. And here's what the inside of this one looks like. It is a beautiful rose romantic color story. Patrick Ta has some amazing, really pigmented formulas in this palette as well. He divided it into, we have a row of mattes and a row of shimmers. At the bottom, these shimmers are all really nice, intense, attention-grabbing shimmers as opposed to the shimmers in his first palette, which weren't as like consistent as these. These are all kind of the same-ish formula. Also, these two incredible cream colors right here make this palette really special. I'm obsessed with the shades he chose for the cream shades. Let me go ahead and swatch these for you. I dug my nail so hard in one of those creams. Whoopsie. Take a look right here. These are the two cream shades that come in this Major Dimension 2 eyeshadow palette from Patrick Ta. And these are not only highly pigmented, but they're also extremely easy to blend, and you can use them as a base for your eyeshadow look, or you can sandwich these creams in the middle of the matte shades if you want to, or you can use them on top of the matte shades as like a finishing product. It literally doesn't matter in which order you use the shades, it simply works fantastic. I did do a dedicated video for this palette where I created either 2 or 3 looks with it, and I have been obsessed with it ever since. It has a couple of duochrome shades. Let me swatch them for you, as well as this deep color right here and this lighter one as well. These are my 4 favorite shimmers right here. As you can see, very highly pigmented, really nice and intense. I love how attention grabbing they are. I honestly really love the formula of this palette in general. And then take a look at these absolutely stunning 4 matte shades as well. The only con that I can think of in regards to this palette is that you'll always get a rose look with it because it has a pretty monochromatic color story. There's not a lot of diversity within the palette, but usually those are my absolute favorite colors to use on my eyes. I feel like they make my eyes stand out, and not just me. I feel like these colors are flattering on absolutely everyone, and this palette has a really nice depth to it, so you can create some really sexy looks with it, and I love it. This is my number 14 pick. At number 13, I have a palette that is colorful, but that makes me feel very comfortable about using color all at the same time. And that is this one right here, the Solman 2 palette from Odin's Eye. I'm not sure if they still have this on their website or if it's currently sold out, but this palette is amazing. You can create some really stunning looks with this one that are colorful but wearable all at the same time. This is not a palette that I'm using a lot as of lately because we're in the middle of winter right now, so I feel like this is definitely more of a spring-summer color story, which was when this palette came out. But during those months, I couldn't stop thinking about it, I couldn't stop grabbing for it, and I loved all of the looks that I created with this palette. I did do a dedicated video with this one as well, where I created either 2 or 3 looks with it. I think it was probably 3, and I love this color story. Let me show you some of my favorite shades in this one. Odin's Eye is a brand that absolutely kills it with their shimmer shades. They are very attention grabbing, very nice and sparkly. They actually have some shades that are even sparklier than these, but these are awesome as well. And they also have some really amazing mattes. Check out this color story. As you can see, I'm most drawn to the blues and the purples of this palette, much more than the warm tones in it, but I can use those as well, no issue. I just really love these colors specifically the most, and I have created some really stunning looks with this one. This shimmer shade right here on my middle finger is so special. It's kind of a duochrome shade, and it looks so delicate when you put it on the eye. I love to use it on the inner corner or right in the center, and it just gives any eye look such a beautiful contrast. This is definitely one of the best palettes that I tried this year. I really love it. At number 12, I have a palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This one here is the Novo palette that came out a few months ago, and I'm obsessed with this color story. This one is a bit more of a natural wearable palette. I love that she included some olive tone greens in here. I've been really into those types of shades this year. I love that it has really nice transition-y type shades. I love the 5 looks 1 palette I created with this one. It definitely made me fall in love with this palette even more, because when I first got it, I was like, this is such a beautiful cohesive color story, but what is this random purple doing here? However, when I did that 5 looks 1 palette video, I found that using that purple with this color story was exactly what this palette needed in order to be special. I feel like every time I used the purple, I liked the look 5 times more than I did before I added the purple. Anyways, let me show you some of my favorite shades in this one. Of course, the purple is going to be included in there because I'm obsessed with it. Take a look right here at some finger swatches of my favorite colors. When I do finger swatches, you guys can see like duochromes a little bit better. Also, you can see how buttery each and every one of these shades are. I think Anastasia is killing it with this new eyeshadow formula that they came out with. It's a lot less powder than their formula has traditionally been, in my opinion, but still very, very soft, very blendable, very buildable, and also very pigmented. And so I've been loving the palettes they've been coming out with because they have this incredible new formula that just works better. This is what a brand that wants to keep up with the market should do in order to keep up with the market. You guys know I'm always complaining about Too Faced and Urban Decay not updating their formula, having older formula that just keeps getting worse and worse with time. And Anastasia, in comparison, was competing with Urban Decay and Too Faced back when those were the popular palettes, but it has updated its formula to compete with Natasha Denona, Pat McGrath, Charlotte Tilbury, which are the it brands right now, we'll say, right? So that's also the difference between a brand that is still owned by the creator of it versus a brand that was sold to L'Oreal or Estee Lauder, you know? Anyways, I'm saying all that to say that I think Anastasia is doing a fantastic job with their new palette releases and their formulas. I'm glad they slowed down. They didn't release 5 palettes or 6 palettes last year. They just released a couple and both of them were really amazing, this one being my favorite. At number 11, I have a Natasha Denona palette that very recently came out, and that is this one right here, the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. This one definitely wins most innovative palette of the year because even though this color story I feel like reminds me of colors I already have, I was not able to find dupes for it in my collection, which tell me it is a truly innovative color story. The way she did the greens is a bit different. They're not quite olivey, but they're not quite teal either. I don't know, there's something about them that is very special. I love that we have some really nice transition shades in this one and also some really fun pops of color. Let me swatch some of my favorite shades. My only complaint ever with Natasha Denona, because I love Natasha Denona palettes, is that I wish the shades were more sparkly. I love sparkle, and I know that not everyone loves sparkle. I understand. We don't have to have a lot of sparkle in every palette, but like, you know, give us at least a couple of sparkly shades per palette and I will be so content with that. She makes some really stunning shimmers, as you can see right here. These 3 are purely shimmer. The one in my little finger has maybe a bit more sparkle to it, but it still could be more sparkly. If you're going to go for sparkle, give me all of the sparkle. Because Natasha Denona already gives us the best matte shades on the market. So if we could combine that with not just some really stunning shimmers, but also some sparkly shades, she would have no competition. Anyways, these are some of my favorite mattes and my favorite shimmers that came in this palette. Of course, I have a video where I reviewed this palette, gave you my first impressions, created a couple of looks with it, and then I also did a 5 looks 1 palette with this one that I thoroughly enjoyed. Creating looks with this palette was just easy, and I love combining the green shades with the warmer colors that the palette has as well. 10 out of 10, of course. Very innovative color story, and Natasha does not ever disappoint with her formula. It's been very consistent for a while now and we love it, but we would also love some more sparkle. Thank you. Top 10, and at number 10 I have a palette that I didn't even expect to like that much, let alone love. But I do, I absolutely love it. And I'm talking about the Michaela palette in collaboration with Glam. The reason I did not expect to like this palette, let alone love, is because I was not a huge fan of the first palette she came out with Glam. I felt like a few of the shades in that palette were a little bit inconsistent, and I also found it extremely difficult to create looks that I loved. However, this palette, very different. I really love the formula in this palette so much. Every single one of those shimmer shades, you only have to look at them and they're already stuck to your eyelids, okay? They are super pigmented, highly foiled metallic shades. I love them. And not only are the shimmer metallic shades in this palette amazing, but it also has a whole bunch of matte shades that go so well with each and every one of those shimmers. It makes it very easy to create looks. It's definitely not a palette for the faint of heart. It's definitely not a basic palette. It is very intense and very colorful, but if you are into intense colorful looks, even if it's just every once in a while, not for every day, because I'm definitely not an everyday colorful type of person myself, but every once in a while I like to dabble, and this was an absolutely amazing palette to dabble in this year. I really enjoyed it. I did create 2 stunning looks with this one when I first reviewed it, and I have since used it kind of off camera whenever I felt inclined to. Let me show you some of my favorite shimmers in this one. Take a look right there. I literally was going to grab 4 shades, but I went for 8 because I love all of these shimmers that this palette has. They are so pigmented, so buttery, so intense, so absolutely incredible. Just fantastic formulation in these metallic shades right here. Okay, let's go ahead and swatch some of my favorite mattes. I love this whole last row back here. It's just full of really intense, highly pigmented, deep, moody shades, and I am so here for it. I love these. And then you also have some other colorful shades that you can use as transition that are amazing. Take a look right there. I need a new makeup wipe. My fingers are looking filthy, but I had to swatch as many shades as I possibly could from this palette because it is a massive palette with a ton of extremely amazing shades. Even after I had swatched everything and I had seen how amazing the shimmers were, I was still kind of low-key scared that the matte shades weren't going to perform to my liking. I really thought that they were going to maybe blend away or be patchy, or that they would be hard to blend. Sometimes I have an issue with like pressed pigments. I can't blend them like regular eyeshadows, but honestly, I had 0 issues with this palette. It was amazing, and if you like creating colorful looks, this is one of the best palettes you can add to your collection. It is so good. At number 9, I have another colorful palette that I fell in love with this year, and it is from Mother, of course. This one right here, the Celestial Nirvana Holiday Palette, is definitely a favorite of mine this year. My favorite out of the 3 color stories that this palette has is definitely this more neutral one up here, but I really love that Pat McGrath finally gave us some colors to play with. They were needed in her collection, and even though this is not a permanent thing, I can appreciate these really stunning colorful shades. Let me swatch some of my favorite matte colors. Take a look at how absolutely smooth these wear, and in true Pat McGrath fashion, these are incredible shades. They blend like an absolute dream. They build up like an absolute dream. I had no trouble at all using them. I created, I believe, a total of 7 looks with this palette. I did a review video at first where I swatched everything and gave you, of course, my first impressions of this palette. And then I followed that up with a 5 looks 1 palette video that was so much fun to create. This palette is not only colorful and beautiful, but it also has some neutral shades that you can pair your colorful shades with, which make it very special, and it makes it so that you can have an unlimited amount of looks basically that you can create with this one. Anyways, let me stop blabbing and show you my favorite shimmers that this palette brings. Oh, this one's so pretty too. Let me swatch with my thumb. Here's 5. Here's 5 of my favorite shades in this palette. I know this one on my thumb looks kind of basic, but I had to show you it because it's actually one of my favorites. I love combining that color with this green. Okay, just take a look at that thumb right there. That right there is one of my favorite combinations with this palette. Those 2 colors go together so well. But then we also have these 4 shimmers right here on the tip of my fingers that are so absolutely stunning. So beautiful. This palette doesn't have any special shades from Pat McGrath. It just has a beautifully curated color story with Pat's amazing eyeshadow formula. What is not to love, right? I've been loving this palette ever since it came out, and of course I highly recommend it. Pat McGrath, I believe, is still having her 35% winter sale. Her brand has now been on sale, I think, for like 6 weeks, which is crazy, but also amazing. So if you haven't gotten your hands on this one yet, there's still time. You can get it 35% off. Moving on to the 8th spot, and I also have a Pat McGrath palette in this one, a Pat McGrath palette that came out at the beginning of the year and I absolutely love, and that is this right here. This is the Pat McGrath and Bridgerton Round 2 palette, and this is the color story that it has. My heart just melts a little every time Pat puts a burgundy shade in one of her palettes because I love burgundies. You guys can see it. I'm wearing a burgundy right now, and take a look at how beautiful and how creamy and how smooth this one is. This palette also has this incredible minty shade right here that is such a beautiful contrast to the burgundy. It has this stunning green gold situation happening right here, which is so lovely. And then one of my favorite champagne colors in my whole collection, this one here, is actually the color I'm wearing right in the center of my eyelid. I love it. Take a look at these right here. These are my top 4 favorite shades from this Pat McGrath palette. Just take a look at how much these beautiful shades sparkle. I love me some sparkle, and I also love burgundy mattes for my outer corner. So this palette just kind of hits all of my little check marks, if you know what I mean. And I love creating looks with it exclusively, but I also love reaching in for some of these absolutely stunning shimmers that the palette has, like I did today. And of course I'll tell you what other palettes I use as we move forward in this video. I combined a few, okay? I was feeling creative and I did not film this, I'm sorry. Anyways, this Pat McGrath and Bridgerton collaboration palette wasn't only just my favorite collaboration palette that she came out with this year, but also my 8th favorite palette out of 69 palettes that I tried in 2022. Now let me tell you about palette number 7 because I'm obsessed, and it is the palette that produced the absolutely stunning, very intense glitter that I'm wearing on the inner corner of my eyes. And it is a palette that is full of glitters, and I am so here for it. I'm talking about the Adept Cosmetics Minka palettes. If you are a lover of all things shiny, you need to get your hands on this palette right here. As you can see, it's pretty much an all shiny palette. It does have these really beautiful matte shades back here that you can combine with any of these shimmers to create some incredibly stunning looks. But honestly, I see myself reaching for this one the most for the specific shades that this palette has. Let me show you how pigmented these shades are, because I want you guys to like comprehend how soft they are. Here's my finger. I'm very lightly going to barely touch that shade, barely touch that second shade, and just do the same for a few more. And then let me show you how insanely intense those shimmers are on my finger. Are you freaking kidding me right now? I'm obsessed with how creamy these super foiled metallic glitter shadows are. I have never seen a formula quite like this one in any other brand before, and it doesn't crease, it doesn't move. I can wear it for a bunch of hours and it just stays on there, to be completely honest with you. And I have hooded eyes, which things a lot of times will crease and transfer on me. Now, of course, this is not for the faint of heart. You definitely have to love chunky glitters on your eyelids in order to get a lot of use out of this palette, because as you can see, it's what it mostly has in it. And I put one of those shades in the inner third of my eyelids today so that you can see how they would look in an eyeshadow look. I think they look absolutely gorgeous and stunning. Let me swatch some more shades for you. I'm going to barely touch Luna here. I'm going to touch the multi-chrome shade right here. The color Selena, I love. Let me just do one more. Layla right here is the color I'm wearing on the inner corner of my eyes right now. Just take a look at how stunning these shades are. Look at the multi-chrome in my middle finger. How many colors do you see right there? Because I see a whole bunch of them. Telling you I'm obsessed with this Minka palette is the understatement of the year. The only reason this palette is not even closer to the front, the only reason this palette is not, let's say, my top 5, is because it only has 2 matte shades and they're both purple. I wouldn't trade away any of these stunning glitters right here, but if it had like a couple more mattes and they were maybe like brown neutral or something, then this palette would probably be like my number 1 because it is so incredible. I just prefer to go in it for pops of color rather than to create entire looks, but I highly recommend it. The formulation of those glitter shades is just insane. It's so good. Oh, by the way, I did create, I believe, 2 looks with that palette when I first reviewed it. I'm going to pop up the thumbnail right now, but it's a video where I tried that, and I also tried the new collection of REPHR brushes. Moving on to palette number 6, it is a Pat McGrath palette, and it is this year's Pat McGrath Mothership palette, to be specific, which it's a bit interesting, and I'll tell you why. Every year I've done a rankings video and Pat McGrath has released a new Mothership palette. That Mothership palette that she released that year usually ends up being my number 1 favorite palette of the year, and this year it's my number 6. And I'll explain why in a second, but it is a beautiful palette and I do love it. I'm talking, of course, about Pat McGrath Mothership number 10. This one is called Moonlit Seduction. Let me open up my box real quick. Here's what the inside of what this insanely beautiful palette looks like. And the only reason this isn't my number 1 favorite palette of the year is because, well, I am obsessed and in love with the shimmer shades that this palette has. I cannot say the same thing for some reason when it comes to the matte shades that she shows for it. I just don't love this matte shade or this matte shade right here specifically, which is weird because I keep telling you guys I love mauves and burgundy, but these are neither mauve nor burgundy. This is kind of this weird pinky mid-tone shade that doesn't add the depth that I want to see from it, and I don't know, it just makes this palette not be my favorite for some reason. Is it a palette that I hate? Obviously not. It's my 6th favorite palette of the year, but it is my 6th favorite palette of the year due mainly to the shimmer shades that it has. Do I also still love the formulation of these mattes? Absolutely, because they're Pat McGrath mattes and she, you know, has an incredible eyeshadow formula, but they're just not my favorite shades she's ever created. Anyways, let me show you my favorite shades from this palette, which are obviously the 4 Astro Blitz shades right here. This one right here, this particular color, this might be my favorite Pat McGrath eyeshadow color she's ever launched. I like that shade that much. Take a look right here at the 4 Astro Blitz shades that are in that Mothership number 10 palette, and this color right here specifically being my favorite color Pat McGrath has ever put in a palette, period. I'm so obsessed with this one. I want to pull this palette out all the time just to grab for that shade. And you know what? I actually really do like both of these as well because they make for amazing inner corner colors. This palette also has this incredible pewter shade, this amazing deep cool toned matte shade, and this highlighty type color that also make the palette very special. I also really love these 3 shades and they're so complementary to the Astro Blitz shades that the palette has as well. And I don't hate the 2 mattes that I showed you at the beginning, but they're also not my favorite, and I feel like this palette could have been so much more special if she were to have chosen different matte colors to pair with these shimmers. Anyways, I keep going off on that tangent, but the point is that I do absolutely love this palette, so much so that out of 69 palettes I tried this year, this is number 6. I'm just pissed that it's not number 1 because it has such amazing quality shimmers. It should be number 1. I still do love this palette. I've been reaching for this one a lot lately, in particular for its shimmers. It is worth it just because of the Astro Blitz shades in my opinion. But then every single formula in there is fantastic too. As I do with every single Pat McGrath palette that comes out, especially if it's a Mothership, I did a video where I did my first impressions on this one and I reviewed it, and then I of course proceeded to do a 5 looks 1 palette with this palette. And I think that the 5 looks 1 palette video I created with this one contributes to the fact that this is not my #1 palette of the year, because I realized while creating the 5 looks with this palette that I can't get a lot of variation in the looks. A lot of them end up looking very similar, and so that's why it is #6 and not #1 once again. Moving on to my top 5 palettes of 2022, and at number 5 I have a palette that I can't even believe it made it this far forward, because when I first tried it I kind of shit on it a little bit, you know. I'm talking about the Huda Beauty Empowered palette, and the reason that I at first didn't think much of this one is because some of the shades in there do look a bit repetitive, do look like we could have a bit more variety. However, it is number 5 because what it comes down to is that these are exactly the types of shades that I like to reach for, and that there is enough variation in here to create 5 distinctly different looks with this palette, all 5 of which I absolutely loved. So this is the 5 looks 1 palette I created with this palette, and this image you're looking at is the reason that this palette is so far forward in my collection this year, because these are 5 distinctly different looks that I adore. I love each and every single one of these so much, and it makes me realize how amazing this palette actually is. This Empowered palette by Huda Beauty has some of the most incredible formulas Huda has ever come out with. Her bigger palettes are always made in Italy, so they always have the creamiest, most luxurious formulas, and all in all, I absolutely love the color story. I complain about having too many golds all the time, but who am I kidding? I love the gold shades in the palettes. Here are 4 of the shimmers that are in this palette that I absolutely adore, and they're super highly pigmented, insanely shimmery, very attention grabbing shades, which make me love this palette even more, because those, as you guys know, are exactly the types of shimmers that I love wearing on my eyelids. And then this palette also has some incredibly stunning mattes as well. In particular, the cool tone mattes in this palette I adore. Oh my god, I forgot to swatch this shimmer right here, which is definitely one of my favorites. This really intense burgundy shimmer right here. So take a look right there at my 3 favorite mattes, and another one of my favorite shimmers, which is this really nice and intense burgundy purpley color that just looks so great in the center of the eyelid. These are definitely my types of color, and this is definitely a palette that I see myself reaching for over and over and over again. I think I have to redo my Huda Beauty rankings, because with the palettes that came out this year, I think I might have, you know, some new favorites. I think some things shifted in my ranking, so if you're interested in seeing that video, definitely let me know. Besides the 5 looks 1 palette with this one, I also have the video where I originally reviewed it and gave you my first impressions, which I already told you they weren't the best, because a lot of the shades do look like one another, I swear, but once you put them into practice, that doesn't even matter, because I love the looks that I created, and that's what loving a palette or being excited about a palette comes down to, you know, loving the looks that you create with it. At number 4, I have a palette that came out very recently and just simply swept me off my feet, and that is this one right here from Makeup by Mario. When I tell you, he changed the formula to something that is so much better than what he used to have, and he gave us a fantastic palette that has an incredible combination of mattes and shimmers, and that has some really stunning neutral shades that you can use for pretty much any occasion, because this could be your daily palette or it could be your glam palette, and it will serve you perfectly both ways. I obviously love every single shimmer that this palette has, and I love that it has really nice, luxurious looking, fancy, glamorous looking sparkles in it. These are just such delicate, sparkly shades. They make your looks beautiful and attention grabbing, but very glamorous all at the same time. And then of course you can combine all of the sparkles that I just showed you with all of these absolutely stunning, very pigmented matte shades right here, and the combination of that makes this palette totally worth it. As you can see, I barely had to touch it to get full-on pigmentation from each and every one of those matte shades. Like I said, this palette has an absolutely incredible formula. He killed it with this one. I honestly bought it and I didn't even know what to expect because I had never loved a Mario palette before, but he did such a fantastic job with this one. I highly recommend it if it's still available on the Sephora website, and it made it all the way to my number 4 out of 69 today. So yep, I love it. Oh, I also did a video, of course, reviewing this one where I believe I created a couple of looks with it, so definitely check it out if you want to see the types of looks that I've been creating with it. And I've also used it a couple of times in combinations with other palettes. Top 3 palettes of the year, and at number 3 I have the palette responsible for the smoky matte part of my eye look today. So I told you the inner corner is a shimmer from the Minka palette, the center shade is from the Pat McGrath Bridgerton 2 collaboration palette, and then the matte colors on my eye look today are from a teeny tiny palette that made it all the way to number 3. And that is this Pat McGrath cutie right here. This is the Pat McGrath Midnight Voyage palette that came out this year. And the color combinations in this palette are so spot on and so me, so the types of colors that I love to reach for, that this little tiny thing made it all the way to my number 3 favorite of the year. If that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what will. I absolutely adore this little travel palette. I went ahead and swatched all 6 of the shades right here on my finger. The 2 mattes from this palette definitely have my heart. Like I said, they are the mattes I'm wearing on my eye look today, and they are just such incredible shades to have and blend into one another. The color selection of the Midnight Voyage travel palette is the greatest thing ever. Plus, it's so thoughtfully curated. You have an inner corner shade, you have 3 different shimmer shades you can pop in the center of the eyelid, and then you have the greatest 2 matte shades ever to create really stunning looks with. It's a perfect palette also in the sense that you can create really stunning, everyday, natural, toned down looks with this one by just using, let's say, this row of colors right here, or you can spice things up and make things very glamorous and sultry and sexy by mixing the shades with the darker, deeper colors of the palette, especially with that really beautiful burgundy matte color that this palette has. All this palette is truly missing for me is a very sparkly shade, and for a palette this tiny with a cute little 6 pan color selection, I honestly couldn't ask more of it. Also, this palette is probably Pat McGrath's most affordable palette ever. She's selling her quints now that do have bigger shades in them for $36 I believe, but this little tiny palette was $29 or is $29 if I remember correctly. So it is Pat McGrath's most affordable palette that you can get your hands on, and it is so good and so special that it made it all the way to my 3rd palette I tried in 2022. I have a video that I made live reacting to this palette when it first came out and grabbing the different shades that I already had, because some of them are existing shades and some others of our Pat McGrath palettes, and creating a look with those. And I enjoyed that live video so much. It's definitely probably my favorite live video I've ever made. And then I also tried this palette once I received it in a different video, and I absolutely loved playing with it, and I have continued to reach for it ever since. Next time I travel anywhere, guess who's coming with me? Moving on to my 2nd most favorite palette I tried this year. This is great because this is a collaboration palette with one of my friends here on YouTube. It's also amazing because it made me discover a whole new brand that I hadn't even tried prior to this collaboration, and I love this palette so much. It is my 2nd most favorite palette that came out in 2022. I'm talking about the Adept Cosmetics and Heather Austin palette. Of course, this palette has a very thoughtfully curated color story, and it has the incredibly spectacular shimmer formula from Adept Cosmetics. Heather did such a fantastic job curating the colors for this palette. obsessed with every single shade in here and how pigmented and intense each and every one of these shimmers are. Take a look right there at how stunning these are. I'm sorry some of my fingers are stained. I literally ran out of makeup removing wipes as I was filming this video. Thankfully I'm almost done, but anyways, take a look right there at some of my most favorite shimmers from this Heather Austin palette. And out of all of the Adept Cosmetics palettes I've tried this year, which have been I think 4 maybe total, this is the one with the best matte shades, because Heather really thought of everything. She combined these absolutely incredible shimmers with 4 really creamy, highly pigmented mattes, and you can create some really stunning looks with this Heather Austin palette. I did a video when I first tried it where I created either 2 or 3 looks with it. I had never tried Adept Cosmetics eyeshadows before, and when I tell you my mind was blown, my mind was blown. After I created that video, they reached out and they've sent me the palettes they've come out with since, which I feel so lucky that they've done that, because I have tried some of my favorite palettes of 2022 from this brand and I love it. I absolutely love it. So a huge congratulations to Heather Austin for coming out with this incredible palette, and also thank you because she made me discover Adept Cosmetics and these insanely beautiful shimmers and duochromes that they make. So 10 out of 10, highly recommended, okay? I love it. Unfortunately, my Adept Cosmetics discount code doesn't work with this palette. I don't know if anyone's code does, I don't think so. But it being my second most favorite palette this year, obviously it's totally worth it to pay full price. And finally, my #1 most favorite palette of 2022, drumroll please. I wonder if anyone's keeping tabs on which palette I haven't talked about yet. Anyways, my #1 most favorite palette this year is this beauty right here from Natasha Denona. This is the Natasha Denona My Dream Collection eyeshadow palette. I feel like I could totally tell you that I used it for today's video because it kind of looks like I did. Maybe not the super sparkly shade on the inner corner, but otherwise I feel like you would believe it. This palette is right up my alley because it has the perfect color story for me. I just love these shades. And yesterday or the day before, I talked about my Dream Collection lip combination from Natasha Denona, which I'm wearing again today, and I told you it could as well be named the Dream Collection from Patty because I love it so much. And I realize now it's because I feel like Natasha Denona and I have very similar coloring. We both have dark hair, light skin, light eyes, and so things that look good on her probably also look good on me, and they are my go-tos as well. So she curated this palette for her. It was her dream collection. Obviously she's going to grab 4 colors that suit her and her complexion, and so because I feel like we have similarities in our complexion, these are also totally my colors. My one thing, because I'm going to say this every time I talk about a Natasha Denona palette, no matter how much I like it, my one thing is that I wish at least a couple of the shades in here were more sparkly. I want sparkles like the sparkles in the gold palette from Natasha. Please and thank you. Anyways, this palette, obviously, as I said, my #1 palette of the year, so I absolutely love it. It has this really stunning multi-chrome shade. It has this shade right here that is pretty shiny, but it could be even shinier in my opinion. I also love this orangey shimmer right here. And let's see, what else do I swatch? This one makes her a really beautiful inner corner shade. So take a look right there at my 4 favorite shimmers from the My Dream Collection eyeshadow palette right there. And this palette obviously also has some of the most incredible mattes. Natasha Denona has my favorite matte eyeshadow formula ever, and I really love the matte shades that she included in this palette. We have some cool tones, we have some warm tones, some neutral, some burgundy, which is my favorite. What is not to love? As I said before, I did a video review in this one where I created 2 stunning looks, and then quite a few weeks later, it took me a while to go back to this one because so much came out at the same time. So a few weeks later, I also did my 5 looks 1 palette with this one, and you guys seem to really enjoy it because in all honesty, I uploaded it really late, so I didn't really think it was going to get that many views, and they got the views I would have expected if I were to have uploaded it when it first came out, which to me is good. Anyways, a beautifully curated color story and colors that are definitely go-tos for me. So obviously this one is the one that I'm most excited to continue to use. It has incredible formulas, and I just see myself reaching for this one all the time. Therefore, it is my number one. I also really love this packaging with the paint splashes right here at the beginning. I don't know, I feel like that's kind of unique and edgy, and I love it. So that concludes this video. These are my top 15 palettes of 2022 ranked from worst. Obviously not worst, but from least to most exciting out of the best of the best of the best. If you missed out on yesterday's video where I ranked the rest of my palettes that I tried in 2022, definitely check it out. I'm going to link it right there on the eye. And that is all I have for today's video. Don't forget to please give it a thumbs up before you leave. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please don't leave without subscribing. I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you back in the next video. Bye.